Hi Amy, this is feedback on the paper 2 mock that you did just before Christmas. Question 1, you've scored 3 out of 4. A isn't true. Jay Rayner doesn't have good memories of his time in school. The correct answer should be C. As a boy, he worried about handing in his homework on Monday mornings. But 3 out of 4 is a good start. Moving on to question 2, where you're asked to write a summary of the differences between Eddie and Henry. Unfortunately, your mark is limited to band 1 for this question, because if we look at the mark scheme, it says offers paraphrase rather than inference, makes simple reference textual details from one or both texts, and statements show simple difference between texts. You have used part of a quote from source A, but you haven't used any quotes in source B, and you've made slight references to the differences. And that you said Eddie's a 14-year-old boy living in the 21st century, and compared it to Henry. He's a very different boy to Eddie, as he lives away from home in a boarding school and a very different environment. You have mentioned the difference in language due to the times of change, but you've not used any quotes to back up your points. So unfortunately that limits you to 2 marks out of the possible 8 for this question. There were a number of things that you could mention which would have gained you marks. For example, you could have contrasted the difference in the relationship that Eddie has with his father to the cool, distant relationship that Henry has with his dad. The fact that everything seems to come easily to Eddie and he does well without having to work hard, but Henry has to work hard to get to where he is, and apparently he seems to have gone backwards because his spelling seems to be worse than it was before he went to boarding school. You could also mention the fact that Eddie is cheeky towards his dad, making fun of him, whereas Henry is very polite and shows a lot of respect for his father, and that his relationship isn't as close as Eddie's is to his father. So there were a range of different things that you could comment on, but you also must make sure that you are using direct quotes from the text to back up your points. Moving on to question 3, this answer also is limited to level 1. It's a 12-mark question, so you'd need to make at least 4 different points about the language that's been used, and you've only really mentioned one, the complex sentence at the start. You do go on to talk about him calling his father dear, but you haven't finished that point, so unfortunately again I can only give you 2 marks here. Again, there was a lot of things that you could comment on. The fact that he uses the repetition of my dear father because he's trying to persuade his father to let him come home, so he's trying to make the relationship between them seem more than it is, especially when you consider the fact that he's been away from home for 2 years, so it can't actually be that close. So it does suggest that he's purposely using it to give the impression to his father that he cares deeply for him. He also uses a simile when he talks about treated more like a bear than a Christian. There's the use of a hyperbole when he says, I hope, my dear father, you will let me come home at Christmas, and that we may once more meet again alive, if God permit me to live so long. So he's trying to make his dad feel guilty, suggesting that if he doesn't bring him home soon, he might not see him again. And then he uses an adverb and adjectives to describe the food and the bedding. So all these would have gained you more points had you been able to use them. Unfortunately, question 4 is also limited to level 1. You've looked at some of the perspective of Jay Rayner, Eddie's dad, towards education and parenting, and you state that he's quite relaxed, and given an example of the humour that he uses. Unfortunately, you've not considered the evidence from source 2, so there's no comparison of the perspectives being made or the ways that they do this. So again, I can only give you 1 mark for this question. This gives you an overall score of 8 out of 40. I know this is the first time that we've attempted this paper 2, but I would have liked you to have been scoring a bit higher than that. However, we've still got 5 or 6 months left before the exam, so there's still all to play for, and I'm sure that you're more than capable of achieving the level 4 at least. You do need to make sure that you attend, and if you're not able to attend, that you try and complete the work before the lessons so that you're not falling behind all the time. And you must make sure that you do your homeworks, as I know we've had an ongoing battle with homework, but as you can see, you do need to do the homework, so I can see how you're coping with things, and you can also see what you need to work on. So new start in January, all homework's done, and we shouldn't have any problems getting to where you want to be.